Welcome to the Precision Ag bite-sized webinar, if you like. Given the situation we're all in, we're in a position where it's unable to hold the Precision Ag Symposium as we normally do, and we know the benefits of it. The PA Symposium have been that we travel around the world. Around the nation. That's around the world, isn't it? We travel around the nation trying to meet in different places to network and see different trade displays, meet new processes of doing PA, a whole range of things. And we can't do that at the moment. So we just decided we're going to have hopefully a couple of these smaller bite-sized pieces. So my name's Brett Wheel and I'm from the University of Sydney, the Precision Ag Lab. And with me today, I've got Nicole Demos and Frank Demden from SPAA running this program. And we've got a couple of panelists that are going to speak to us about a range of things in PA to keep us all running in the network, if you like. And first up, we have a keynote from Professor Jess Lowenberg-DeBoer. Now, Jess has been working in precision agriculture around the world. He's at the moment the Elizabeth Creek Chair of Agri-Tech Economics at Harper Adams University in the UK. And his main work, or his body of work over the last 30 or so years, has been on the economics of agricultural technology. At the moment, he's the president of the International Society of Precision Agriculture, and he's the co-editor of the Journal of Precision Agriculture, two very important positions. I've known him since he was at Purdue University as the Associate Dean, and he was directing some agriculture international programs there. But as I said, he's worked around the world, and he's got one of the most extensive networks in PA that I certainly know of. And so we'd like to welcome Jess to talk to us with the keynote today on the future of PA, given his background and given where he now is as the president of the ISPA. And he's going to talk to us about some technology, how it opens doors. He's going to talk about some economic pressures of PA. And he's also going to talk to us about the role of ISPA. So Jess, if you'd like to share your screen, that would be fantastic.
Okay, can you see my screen?
It's coming along. Yes, we can.
Let's see if we can.
That's it. Perfect.
Okay, great. Great to be with you today to talk about some opportunities in precision agriculture. As we all know, precision agriculture, some aspects of it have been enormously successful, in particular GPS technologies, GPS guidance, which, by the way, have some Australian roots. You can see there in the photo of the beeline technologies in the late 90s. That's been very successful. Other technologies have not seen quite as much adoption, and some of that is due to technology issues, some of it is economics. But the goal of this presentation today is to think about the technologies that are opening the doors for new PA advances, and to describe how those technologies might respond to some social and economic pressures, and then to share a few thoughts on the role of the ISPA and SPAA as a sister organization. So one of the real opportunities for PA is in the rapid development of agricultural robotics. And you're probably aware that we don't really know what crop robots will look like in the future. There's a number of visions, and each one of those visions have with them a vision of what agriculture will look like. So up in the upper right corner of the screen is a vision of very large autonomous equipment, mostly coming from traditional ag equipment manufacturers. In the lower right corner is a very different vision that doesn't look anything like current conventional tractors from Saskatchewan. The dot technologies. On the left is the retrofitted hands-free hectare model, and in the middle are one vision of those swarm robotics. So we don't really know what that's going to look like, and in part that depends on what we expect those robots to do. So the discussion of robots and autonomous equipment usually starts with labor and labor availability and labor shortage, but beyond that, the robots will link with PA in a number of ways. One of them is the robots can collect much more detailed spatial and temporal data. But going beyond that, the robots then can implement much more intensive management. So mechanized intra-row weeding, and right now in Europe, in almost every country, there are trials of robotic weeding. Micro spraying, so there's the argument that it's not that we're using the wrong pesticides, is that we're using them the wrong way. We're broadcasting everywhere instead of a few drops of the right herbicide or the right pesticide for the species in the stage of growth of the pest. There's individual plant fertilizer management, multi-species cropping. Would we do more intercropping, relay cropping, undersowing cover crops if we could do it robotically? And then selective harvest, which probably will be very important, especially for horticultural crops. So instead of doing once through destructive harvest, we harvest out those fruits and vegetables that are ready for market and leave the rest to mature further. Also, there's a whole discussion about smaller, lighter, autonomous equipment that can be used in a field when perhaps it's too wet for large conventional equipment, and in a place like the UK where it rains a lot, that might be very important, and better soil health due to reduced compaction. But there's very few studies of the economics of robotic systems. We did a review recently, and we found 18 studies. Most of them were of automating one field operation, so weeding or harvesting. All of the 18 studies found robots to be profitable under certain circumstances. Only 3 groups of researchers provided broader whole farm perspective. So 2 of them from Denmark, Pedersen and his group, and Sorensen, and then Shockley and his team from Kentucky looking at maize and soybean. A big constraint in economic studies has been the lack of publicly available data on cropping systems. Yes, lots of universities and research institutes have prototypes of robots, but they don't have experience with producing commercially viable crops in robotic systems. But we all know that widespread adoption of robotics and autonomous equipment is unlikely unless it's practical and profitable for farmers. So that's where Hands-Free Hectare at Harper Adams comes in. It created an opportunity for research on the economics of crop robots. And Hands-Free Hectare started out with 1 hectare that was farmed autonomously. It's been ramped up now to Hands-Free Farm, which is 35 hectares. It's a partnership between funding from the UK government and several companies, including the Australian company Smart Ag Systems through their FarmScan UK affiliate. And Hands-Free Hectare was particularly good for a basis for the economics in that they used retrofitted medium and small scale conventional equipment. And we know what that equipment costs. We know the reliability, we know the repair costs, the retrofitting costs were well documented and ended up being less than lots of people thought they would be. And retrofitting is a plausible step toward autonomous equipment. There are some companies in Europe already looking at marketing retrofit kits. There are some companies in North America already doing so. And the medium and small equipment mimics the swarm robotics scenario. And other than the equipment part, hands-free hectare use conventional grain and oilseed production practices. So seed, fertilizer, pesticide, and we know what that is and what it costs and what it'll do. So out of that analysis came some key results. And one of those can be seen in the cost curves. See that in the chart on the screen there. The blue cost curve is the cost of producing wheat. And we looked at wheat just because wheat is well studied. It's easily comparable across countries. I personally think UK farmers have other opportunities that are better than producing more wheat, but okay, let's compare wheat. It has the shape of the conventional cost curve, high costs for small farm size, then dropping over time. The numbers there at each point are the size of the tractor in the equipment, then ranging from 38 horsepower, which was the hands-free hectare size, to 300 horsepower on the 500 hectare farm. The orange cost curve is for the robotic farm. There, as the farm size increases, we're increasing the number of units. So the smallest farm size start with 1 38 horsepower unit, moving up to 2 and then 3. Two things to notice about those cost curves. One of them is that the autonomous cost curve is substantially below, somewhere 20 to 30 pounds per ton lower than the conventional cost curve. And that it tends to flatten out at a smaller farm size. So this opens the possibility that with robots and autonomous equipment, medium and smaller farms could be more cost competitive. And if we compare these costs to the costs of producing wheat internationally, the autonomous cost curve is in fact below the costs for many of the major exporting nations. The slide that usually interests farmers much more when I talk about it is this one about equipment investment. So the blue bars in the chart are the conventional equipment set, and the orange bars are the autonomous equipment set. For the two smallest farm sizes, the autonomous equipment set is slightly more expensive because of the cost of retrofitting. But for the larger farm sizes, the cost of the autonomous farm is substantially smaller, less than 50%, because they're using smaller equipment much more intensively. Now, we need analysis on larger farms in different areas. So in more sparsely populated areas where some of the safety and security issues are very different, we need those analysis, and we don't have those yet. So if we think about an adoption path for field crop robotics, my guess is that for grain and oilseed production in areas with large rectangular fields that are well adapted to conventional mechanization, so like much of North America, Brazil, Argentina, Australia, parts of South Africa, co-robotics are going to be, I think, the next step, and we see that starting to happen. So with the autonomous chaser bins being marketed in North America. In places where field crops are grown on small, irregularly shaped fields, so this is most of Europe, Eastern United States, South Asia, medium and small scale autonomous equipment is possible within 5 years or so. Field horticultural crops are a place where there's an urgent economic need, and the COVID pandemic has again pointed out some problems with depending on seasonal migrant labor, but there's some big engineering problems to be solved before that can happen. So why is co-robotics a likely solution in areas with large rectangular fields? Well, robotics doesn't completely eliminate economies of scale. So the cost of retrofitting or creating autonomy is roughly the same for any size equipment. But on the other hand, safety concerns increase with larger equipment. And so it's more likely that on-site human supervision would be required with larger equipment. And that's particularly a concern with a place like the UK, where the countryside is densely populated and a malfunctioning robot would create a safety problem for the public. And then we have the traditional equipment supply chain, which is well established in those areas where conventional mechanization was particularly successful, and it could adapt to co-robotics more easily than to purely autonomous systems. Part of that scenario is thinking about what law and regulation will do to shape the future of crop robotics. So one key example is human supervision requirements. So the US state of California and the European Union essentially require 100% time human supervision of mobile crop robots, and that changes the economics. So in many cases, if the human has to be in the field anyway, they may as well run at least some of the equipment. Crop robots are a special problem because they're mobile. So far, livestock robots, milking robots, manure scraper robots have been covered under existing industrial robot rules because they're either stationary or they operate in very closed facilities. We see that in Australia, the grain producers Australia and farm equipment manufacturers are taking the lead on this in developing a code of practice, which will be in part based on and with the model of the code of practice for mining equipment in Western Australia, which has been, based on my understanding, quite successful in facilitating the development of autonomous equipment in that sector. And so the world is looking at Australia in terms of what will be the model for regulation of crop robotics. Going on to some of the other possibilities, so we see new sensor technology having the potential to realize that original variable rate fertilizer vision. So variable rate fertilizer was part of the original vision of precision agriculture. It's been spread around the world, but it's not widely used anywhere except in a few niches that we tend to find maybe 15%, 20% of users and crop area being managed with variable rate, but some new sensor technology will, I think, make that more likely. Part of the problem has been technical. Part of the problem has been economic, and we see that now in on-the-go sensors that measure crop response and include with that some measures of other capacities, so soil depth, yield maps, and so on. Right now, that's most advanced for nitrogen, but we can imagine PK, lime, micronutrients also being managed with such systems. Machine vision and artificial intelligence may bring weed and pest management to the plant level. So we may, in the future, we may not be talking quite as much about management zones because we're managing individual plants instead of managing zones. Part of the discussion there is, again, what that's going to look like. Is it going to be equipment that's mounted on conventional tractors with human operators like the John Deere See and Spray technology that they acquired from Blue River? Or is it going to be small robots that trundle through a field and identify and treat individual weeds and pests. Some observers would argue that robotic pesticide application will be particularly adaptable for farms in Europe with smaller, regularly shaped fields and consumers that are very concerned about pesticide application. One of the other challenges is in big data and artificial intelligence. In theory, big data gives us the opportunity to systematically learn from farm experience. In reality, one of the barriers has been a good business model for farmer data pooling. There's lots of attempts going on around the world. So there's companies that pay farmers for data. But when I talk to farmers, they usually think, well, that's nice, but it isn't enough. They also want to benefit from the knowledge that's generated out of that data. There are groups that give farmers access to benchmarking relative to other farmers in their area. And then there are cooperative models that commit to sharing the benefits of data pooling. Some questions will probably require design trials just because the existing observations will not cover the range of input levels and agronomic practices. And so what will those design trials look like? And there's some efforts going around the world. Dave Bullock at the University of Illinois and some of the people who've worked with him have some innovative solutions, but it remains to be seen how that will work out. Given the transactions costs of pooling data, the proof of concept isn't quite there yet. There's really no example that we can point to and say, yes, here's a case where pooling data and big data really made a difference. That may come from some very large farming operations rather than initially from pooling, just because of transactions cost of pooling. One of the challenges in precision agriculture is how does this technology reach small and medium-sized farmers in the developing world? One of the opportunities there is handheld sensors. If a small farmer, and most small farmers in Africa and in South Asia and other places have cell phones, many of them have mobile phones. If they could link their mobile phone to a sensor or use the camera function or somehow use that phone to help them, say, measure fertilizer needs in their crop. One of the constraints for fertilizer use in those places is farmers don't know what fertilizer to use and in what quantities, and because money is short, they end up not using anything. So far, there's been some attempts, but the cost of the sensors has been too high. My bet would be that we have to have some kind of technology that costs less than US $10. That will probably be either a cell phone app or an accessory. So there's lots of opportunities out there. One of the questions then is, how do organizations fit into that? Traditionally, agricultural professional societies have focused on sharing information and networking among members. And you can see there's a photo of the ISPA in Montreal in 2018. It's been a key place where scientists and business people and farmers have gotten together and shared information, started some of those linkages that made progress possible. For most professional societies, in-person events in the past were key, conferences, workshops, and professional societies differed widely on how they were structured, how democratic they were, how much they were open to influences. What that role is like in a post-COVID world is an open question. I don't think anyone has an answer because there's so much uncertainty about what that world looks like. will there be a vaccine? Will there be effective treatment? Will there be future epidemics? Is COVID just, the first of many? But in any case, it's unlikely to return completely to a pre-COVID normal. And some of those differences might be a reduced dependence on annual and biannual in-person events. So this kind of virtual meeting might become more common. There may be less international air travel, so more focus on national and regional meetings. I know in North America already there's focus on meetings that a larger group can drive to instead of flying. More online information sharing, but we really haven't learned yet how to do effective networking online. So we can share information quite well, and we're learning how to do these type of webinars. For the ISPA, the journal Precision Agriculture may become even more important than it has been in the past. The impact factor is up. Right now, Precision Agriculture is the highest ranked multidisciplinary agricultural journal with a impact factor of 4.354. And it has a concrete value for every researcher and academic, since so much of the evaluation system in those sectors depends on publication. And manuscript submissions have increased with the higher impact factor and with the COVID pandemic. So ISPA priorities for the next 2 years. One of my concerns is are all the voices in the society being heard? I think we are seeing more women now in active roles in the society. 2 of the members of the board of directors of the society are women. But there's still geographic concerns. Is the leadership still too dominated by North American members? And it has its roots in the society has roots in North America, but certainly PA is being used all over the world, and there's an important role to be played by members all over the world. How can societies be relevant to their members in the current circumstance? So in the past, ISPA mainly has been active through the ECPA every 2 years, the monthly newsletter, and then supporting the regional conferences, the European conference, the Latin American one, the Asian conference, and this year there will be an African conference on precision agriculture journal. What other kinds of activities are possible and needed? And then how should the society fund its activities? So in the past, okay, there's some membership fees, which brings in a bit of money. There's a small surplus generated by the ICPA, and that was enough to get the society started, but not enough to move the society forward substantially. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions and comments, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Jess. If you could just unshare your screen for us. And we really do here at the uni and SPA, thank you very much, because it's 6:30 in the morning over there. We do appreciate the fact that you've got up to join us here today. And I'd just like to point out to everybody as well that we're putting the Q&A through. We're putting questions through the Q&A, so if you'd like to ask them, we're going to try and keep this moving to time, and so we're going to have maybe a period at the end, 10 minutes after 4 o'clock, to address any questions that aren't answered in the Q&A. Can I just quickly ask you, Jess, that you raised the important issue about the movement of us all around the world and meeting each other in the network, and I think, as I alluded to at the beginning, I think it's been a crucial part of this symposium that we hold, is that we move around and meet each other, but we see technology as well. And so going overseas, we see technology, we see it working, we get to try it. And so I think, how do you feel that this COVID might impact on actually the movement of technology around, PA technology around?
And I agree with you that the ability to go out and see technology actually being used in the field is crucial. And so there is that during this period when travel is being curtailed, there's less of that. I think we can do a better job, not perfect, but we can do a better job of communicating more of that through online means, through video, through live performances, live chat, and so on. And we're learning how to do that better. So, but yes, that's a real concern that I have and lots of people have.
Part of these presentations, so you're talking about the ISPA program, that maybe we've got to get more of those, you know, field days going and things like that. I will ask you one, Jess, that's come in here, and maybe I'll leave you to answer the other one online if you like at the moment. Rob has asked a question here. When you're talking about the size of farms and the applications of the robotics, and he's saying that, you know, in Australian terms, that 35 hectares is a pretty small field. If not, it's probably not even a field here. He's asking here, is there a point at which farms can be too big to take advantage of the swarm system? So the systems where we've got a number of robots moving around. That's a fairly hard question, probably. But.
And I don't think we know the answer to that. From the management and economics standpoint, part of it depends on how the regulation of robotics is structured. So one of the things that happens if you require 100% human on-site supervision, that favors farms with very large fields where one human can then manage a whole swarm of robots, which is you know, unlike the UK situation where the fields tend to be quite small. It depends also on the size of those swarm robots. One can imagine a very large field where there's a number of relatively large robots that are being managed by one human. So the short answer is I don't think we know, but that's one of the issues that we need to resolve.
And the job they're doing, I guess I agree, yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so just one quick one more here. I'm just going to go to Andrea Kosh has asked here, Jess, is the ISPA considering addressing the issues of farm data privacy and security? Like you did touch on that in one of the slides, that people are starting to deal with all these things. Is the ISPA looking at that? Well,
we are looking at that and recognizing that the ISPA is a society of researchers and technology developers and so on. So there's a number of initiatives looking at farm data, what can be done with it, how can it be handled, but we don't have any specific initiatives at this point. It's much more in the hands of our members.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Jess. And if you're prepared to stay along to the end, you can have a look at the Q&A that's up there at the moment and answer some of them by typing if you'd like. Otherwise, we'll pose them to you at the end as well, if that's all right. But thank you again for your participation.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
No problem, Jess. Okay, so next up, we're gonna move into a couple of 3 snapshots of work that's going on here in Australia. Like we normally try to cover a range of industries and a range of angles on PA, no different today. So the first person that we have is Paul Greenwood, and Paul's a senior principal research scientist in the livestock systems, or the extensive livestock systems division there of the New South Wales DPI in Armidale. And he's also got a co-appointment with CSIRO Ag and Food, and he's an adjunct professor at the UNE. And he currently leads a major collaborative research initiative on grazing efficiency, among other things that he's doing. Today he's going to talk to us on eGrazor, the work that he's working on. So thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks, Brett. And can you just let me know if that is the full screen for you?
All good.
All good. Okay. Well, as Brett said, this is really a snapshot around a technology that colleagues of mine have developed in conjunction with our group here in Armidale over the last probably 8 to 10 years or so. And it's called the eGrazor, and it's really about monitoring behaviour of livestock in the extensive grazing systems, and also our efforts to try and estimate intake of pasture within these extensive systems. And we focus most particularly on beef production systems, but the technology we use is applicable across grazing livestock. So the question might be asked, well, why assess behaviours and pasture intake using sensors? Traditionally, these have been difficult, time-consuming things to assess. And what the sensors do is give us the capacity to directly assess them. In fact, for the animals themselves to assess and provide data on behaviours and intake in real time. And so the more traditional methods might involve dosing with markers, having to collect faeces, processing samples, sending them to the lab and so forth. So the sensors really provide the opportunity for some improvements in that regard. And there's also, I suppose, a broad range of both genetic and precision management type applications. So in livestock, we're interested in things such as growth, reproduction, and both of those factors contribute to efficiency, which we combine those measures with intake in particular, pasture intake or feed intake, to generate measures of efficiency, but also they relate to health and welfare, grazing, pasture and rangeland management, and they provide the opportunity to get empirical data that can be used within environmental metrics within farming systems. And so the particular technology is known as the eGrazor. It's been developed by CSIRO and New South Wales DPI, primarily between people based in Brisbane at the Biosciences Precinct and in Data 61 at Pullenvale. And here in Armidale, there are both DPI and CSIRO groups working at CSIRO Chiswick, or the McMaster Laboratory. And this is really an experimental device to monitor the location of behaviours, to monitor location and behaviours in more long-term extensive grazing and foraging studies. And the particular device has got a range of features. Some of those are shown here. It's solar powered with battery storage. It has radio communication so that there is two-way communication, and we've got the capacity to recover data in real time. The device has a range of sensor types. It has a high-frequency GPS, accelerometers, magnetometers and gyroscope, which alone or in combination can form part of an inertial measurement unit. It can also include audio sensors and temperature and pressure sensors. And there's a range of other data, engineering type data, that our colleagues have embedded within this system. And I probably should acknowledge my colleague Greg Bishop-Hurley from CSIRO in Brisbane. He's really been the one who's actually developed up the technology that we apply within our experimental work here in Armidale. And so we do work that classifies a range of behaviours. One that we are most interested in is grazing and foraging behaviour, but we're also interested in things that relate to efficiency such as ruminating, resting, walking, drinking, and we tend to aggregate other behaviours for classification purposes. And this is just an example of a study that we've ran within the last year or so, where we've got animals with sensor devices on them. So they've got the eGrazor collars, which in this case, they're pink collars, so we can find them if they come off out in the field. And they also have other sensors on them. And this particular study was looking at collecting data using video and other methods on specific behaviours that are time-stamped and lined up with the sensor data. And our colleagues have got automated systems to be able to handle this data and extract features which we can then use to classify these specific behaviours. In this particular study, we also monitored the amount of pasture on offer and the rate of pasture decline to be able to get estimates of the rate of intake of pasture of the animals. And this is just an example of some of the data that is generated from our eGrazor devices. We can do this over various time scales. So the data is for one animal, and on the left, we can see the 6 behaviours that I pointed out earlier, here aggregated on an hour by hour basis, and we can see a definite diurnal pattern of grazing, which is very typical and gives us good confidence that we're capturing normal behaviour. And so this is for a 24-hour period, but we can deploy these devices over longer periods. And here you can see the 6 behaviours classified for this particular animal over a longer period out in the grazing paddock. And so we're looking here at about a 4-week period. And you can see there is some variation in the behaviours over time, and these generally correlate with changes in nutritional availability or management associated with these animals. So we're particularly interested in pasture intake, and so you can work in various spatiotemporal or time and space scales to assess grazing behaviour and also pasture intake. Our work is probably a little different from some of the work that other people have undertaken, in that we started at a broader scale where we measured intake over daily or longer periods as, to be able to line up the behaviour data with more aggregated estimates of intake. To get reliable estimates of intake within very short timeframes out in the field environment, as opposed to more controlled experimental environments, is really quite difficult. So we've taken more of a bottom-up approach, but concurrently we also do work particularly around bite characteristics, looking at the frequency of bites and also the size of bites, so that we can relate that to pasture disappearance to provide additional information above that we get from our daily intake estimates. And our daily intake estimates are obtained using more traditional methods such as chemical market dosing of the animals and fecal collections, but also biomass disappearance. So we can take repeated measures over time and estimate the amount of disappearance of pasture by individuals or groups of animals. And so we know from our own work and other work that's been done over many years, including at Harper Adams, Mark Rutter and the group there with the old IGA recorders, that you can actually calculate intake from behaviours and get estimates. And so we run experiments, quite controlled experiments, where we obtain estimates of intake, as I've said, using chemical markers or biomass disappearance, while we can currently run the sensor devices on animals. So it could be animals in individual grazing plots or groups of animals in larger grazing plots. And we can obtain data on the time spent in the various behaviours or the frequency of behavioural events. And so the progress we've made with the eGrazor in field, where we've been able to use this high frequency GPS and inertial measurement units, we've been running experiments with up to 40 head, where we've had the collars on the animals for up to 4 months of continuous grazing at pasture. We've been able to classify 6 behaviour classes concurrently. Our colleagues have now developed the capacity to do the behaviour classification on the collar devices. And as I pointed out earlier, we have the capacity for wireless transmission of data from the remote sites. And so what we're looking to do is to develop and validate new devices, but also behaviours, and to generate data and methodologies that feed into specific applications for grazing livestock. And so part of that is, I suppose, a move towards more commercial devices. And so my colleagues at CSIRO are currently in discussion with technology providers regarding licensing agreements for different types of sensor devices. And part of that will be to generate devices that can be used experimentally for development of applications, but also in relation to commercial devices. And as you can see, the devices that we use on these animals, they're really quite clunky. In terms of a minimal viable product, they're probably very overloaded, but they serve a particular purpose for our needs and for development of applications. And so an example of the sort of data that we've generated that relates to pasture intake, and we do this, try and do this in different grazing environments. An initial study that we did was with ryegrass monoculture, where we had animals in individual grazing plots, highly digestible feed. We ran the trial for 11 days and we found a good relationship between the time spent grazing and the amount of pasture consumed. In this particular study, we explained using the sensor data about 60% of the variation in our estimates of intake using the other methods. We're also able to look at the correlations or a rank correlation between the estimates of intake using the devices and the estimates using our benchmark methods. And this is important really for genetic ranking. And we found in this particular study, the rank correlation was about 0.82. More recently, we've been through the worst drought on record in our part of the world, the New England tablelands. And so we were actually running similar studies with groups of animals on drought-affected mixed grass pastures. And so this particular study that I've reported here, the digestibility of the feed ranged from 45 to 43% over 56 days, very low digestibility, but started with abundant availability, declining to more limited availability. And we found a similar relationship between time spent grazing under these drought conditions to what we'd found previously. The slope was a little flatter in this case, and explaining a similar amount of variation between our estimates of intake using biomass disappearance and our sensor estimates. In this case, the rank correlation between estimates based on the sensor data and the disappearance data was 0.4. So really quite good consistency over different grazing conditions. And so in conclusion, the sensor methods we know can provide pasture intake estimates. They have advantages over other pasture or forage intake methods, where in our case using behaviour classification, in that we get data in real time in the grazing environment. We can integrate location and behaviours over long time periods in changing environments. And I really haven't touched on the GPS location data, but we have the capacity to do things like heat mapping and tracking of animals in the extensive environment using these devices. And the data that we generated can be integrated with other applications within decision support tools. So part of our challenge is really the highly variable, extensive grazing and browsing environments within which we work. And the challenge is to develop, I suppose, technology that's reliable and has high degrees of accuracy. And so one of the things that we're working on, as I've mentioned, the actual forage removal events in both the grazing and browsing and foraging type environments, so that we can improve the reliability of estimates. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Paul. Yeah, I think that's a fascinating area, that getting a handle on how much the animals are taking in is. We'll have to move on pretty quickly, but we might ask you some questions at the end. But is there how different is each animal in the way they do eat? Can you get a reliable estimate of the amount per bite, given a certain biomass?
We've done very small scale studies where we do patch grazing, and we can get estimates. Look, there is variation between animals, and that's where having a handle on both frequency and size of bite would add something to the broader scale type behaviour classification. And look, I can't recall the extent to which within these fairly small scale studies, between animal variation, to what extent or what proportion of the variation that accounted for. But we're confident that at least with the broader scale applications. If we're doing, say, progeny tests and the like, that we've got a good enough precision to be able to at least characterise those animals whose offspring are eating more and eating less. But we really want to tighten up those relationships as much as we can.
Sure. Okay. Well, if you can, there's a couple of questions coming in. So if you're happy to stay around towards the end, we can revisit those, and we'll just keep moving if that's okay. So thanks again, Paul. Thanks very much. So up next, we've got Alison McCarthy. Alison's a senior research fellow from the Centre of Agriculture Engineering at the University of Southern Queensland. Alison. She works on precision engineering and management solutions for use in a range of different crops, don't you? So cotton, grains, dairy, horticulture, and sugarcane. She's going to talk to us a little bit about some of her work, and today we're going to hear about future farming. She's using machine vision for in-season nitrogen assessment in grain crops. Thanks very much, Alison.
Thank you, Brett. Yes, thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining today. Today I will be giving an overview of some of the research that we're doing within the University of Southern Queensland on investigating new ways to determine or to identify sensors to automatically assess in-season nitrogen requirements. And this is focused on grain crops, in particular wheat. And this research is funded by the Grains Research and Development Corporation. Okay, so traditionally in-season or at the start of the season assessment of nitrogen is often conducted through leaf or soil sampling, which can be time consuming and costly if we're looking at measuring this and how it varies over a field. There have been ways of developed for automating nitrogen assessments, particularly focused on optical sensing and determining vegetation indices like NDVI and NDRE. For example, is an optical sensor that has been mounted on a tractor, which can move through the field, assess nitrogen assess nitrogen content from these, from NDVI or NDRE, and then variably apply the nitrogen. However, it has been found to be an inconsistent relationship between NDVI, NDRE, and nitrogen. And so this indicates the need for either additional information to be used to assess nitrogen requirements, and possibly also algorithms that integrate these different data inputs. Now, also traditionally, when this nitrogen is assessed using these sensors, often they're also nitrogen rich and minus plots, which are used for essentially scaling what the measurement is within the field to what the measurement was in those high nitrogen and low nitrogen plots. And what our research is doing is saying, is there another parameter, for example, other crop features, other crop responses, which could be used in place of that NDVI or NDRE, or as well as those measurements to improve the reliability of these kinds of on-the-go sensors for assessing nitrogen status and requirements during the season. An approach that we are looking at is machine vision. So using machine vision, there's potential to assess crop features like tillers, height, canopy cover, also colour from an on-the-go camera. The camera that we've been looking at is this action camera here. It could potentially be used next to or in place of an optical sensor. It's much lower cost as well than the optical sensors. So if it shows to have positive results, then it offers a lower cost option for nitrogen sensing in the field. Image analysis algorithms that are reported in the literature include things like color thresholding, shape analysis, and texture analysis to extract these crop features For example, here's an example of a line detection algorithm being applied on images of wheat to extract tiller counts. And I've also previously done work with GRDC on infield cameras for example, estimating flowering dates and growth rates of wheat crops. So the next step is looking at, well, which sensors should we use in our nitrogen assessment system, and in particular, what kinds of measurements might we be using with those sensors. So the sensors that we investigated using were remote sensing, so the optical sensors, machine vision sensors, which potentially can measure these crop features. And we also needed to incorporate underlying variability or knowledge of the underlying variability in the field. So things like changes in soil water status, soil properties like drained upper limit, and also sowing density, because these can also cause variation in the sensor response to the nitrogen status. So our aim of our trial that I'm reporting here is to compare these different, compare the influence of these different inputs. We evaluated 2 different algorithms to use that sensor data input to estimate the nitrogen status. The first was what we are calling a traditional algorithm, which is essentially a linear model fitted between the response either from the optical sensor or the machine vision sensor in the high and low nitrogen plots, and then applying that out into the rest of the field, but using a linear model that has been developed for say soil with say the most similar soil property like soil moisture status or sowing density. And because the one linear model fitted across the whole field is likely to have much lower accuracy. The second algorithm which we evaluated was machine learning. And so we developed a machine learning algorithm which was developed from a training data set in a trial that I'm about to talk about to make predictions about nitrogen status. So we conducted a data collection trial at our agricultural plot on campus here. We had 9 plots with kind of virtual N- and N-rich areas, as we didn't apply different nitrogen treatments, but there was natural variation in nitrogen content over the area. We collected measurements of the crop in 9 locations weekly, which included tiller counts, cover and height. We collected remote sensing data like NDVI and NDRE. We collected soil moisture and sowing density. And as we were doing this weekly, we wanted to be able to compare those measurements with the soil nitrogen status on those same days. And so we used the APSA model to estimate what that weekly soil nitrogen was, where we parameterized APSA using soil properties for the site, as well as the soil nitrogen samples that were collected at harvest. And then we applied the traditional machine learning nitrogen algorithms for different combinations of those input measurements to compare the accuracy and identify, for example, whether remote sensing or crop features could better indicate nitrogen status. So firstly, here are some results of percentage accuracy comparing the traditional algorithm and machine learning nitrogen algorithm. And these were used to estimate, well, these were compared with the modeled soil nitrate and modeled soil ammonium. And what we found was that for soil nitrate, we got between the 2 algorithms, accuracy of between about 48 and 66%. And our modeled soil ammonium had a lower accuracy of between 29 and 47%. From this traditional algorithm here, performing worse for soil ammonium. Now this algorithm was based on a linear model, which suggests that perhaps there wasn't a linear response from the crop. there wasn't a linear response to the nitrogen that was detected in the remote sensing data. And then next here, I've got the algorithms applied if we're using the crop features in the model as opposed to the remote sensing data. So what we found here was that for estimating the soil nitrate, we overall got improved accuracies over remote sensing input, 72 to 77% accuracy, and similarly got an increase in accuracy for estimating soil ammonium, and also saw that the traditional linear algorithm had lower accuracy, also possibly because of that non-linear response. And the next question we have of this machine vision system is, well, how robust might it be if we were to apply, say, install a camera on a tractor and use it for assessing nitrogen status around the field. So we conducted a trial using by installing some cameras, so one in each plot, where they were collecting imagery throughout the day, so every 3 hours. And we applied image analysis algorithms to estimate canopy cover and greenness and looked at the variation in those parameters at those different times of day. So we can see here some examples of changes in colour and shadows that occur in different times of day of the same crop. And this here shows the daily average mean absolute error in canopy cover and greenness estimated using image analysis algorithms and the variation throughout the day. So overall, we found that they were relatively low amount of error. For example, for canopy cover here, it's generally under 5% error or variation throughout the day. And for determining greenness, then for most of the day, it was also relatively low error, less than 5%, and in early morning, it was a bit higher. And so, and this is possibly because of the lighting coming into or being right in the camera. But overall, we found that it was quite a low rate of error throughout the day. So overall, we have demonstrated here a pilot study, which has shown potential for machine vision to be used for in-season nitrogen status estimation. Using the crop features that could be detected with machine vision, we could estimate soil nitrogen with up to about 77% accuracy. And we found that using remote sensing data in comparison was up to about 66% accuracy. At the moment, we are conducting further trials to refine and evaluate the machine vision system at some of the core sites as part of this Future Farm project and through our collaborators on the project. So here are my acknowledgements of funding from the GRDC for this research. I'd like to acknowledge also our project collaborators for feedback on our research, and also the USQ Centre for Crop Health for helping to manage the trial and field data collection. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Alison. Thanks a lot. So we've got one, well, I think that looks like it's a statement for you here, Alison, that the variation from light variability throughout the day seems like the best solution would be to augment machine vision with a remote sensing layer as a control covariate. The best of both worlds. So, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, that's a good idea. And yeah, so yeah, we'll be looking at ways to kind of improve that robustness. So yeah, thanks.
What do you think about? We'll move on. If you can stay around, we can get some more questions. But you're using a camera. Is there a range of resolutions that we've got to be restricted to here, to spatial, the spatial resolution of the camera?
Well, in our data collection that we have been conducting, we have been using, I guess, a relatively high resolution camera. But when we do most of our analysis, we actually downscale it to very small. And so as part of our trials this season, we've also been using a camera under $100 for comparison.
Right.
And that's one of the objectives, is just to compare the accuracy for this. But again, with our results so far, we have actually already been down sampling, so we see the ability to use quite a low resolution camera.
Great. Well, if you're prepared to hang around for us again, we're running a little bit over time. Time seems elastic in the Zoom world. So thanks again. We'll grab you at the end. Okay, now the last presentation is from Mathew Webb, and Matt's a senior spatial analyst with the Department of Primary Industries, Parks, Water and Environment in Tasmania. Matt works on a range of projects, but mainly he's working on delivering decision support tools to improve profitability on farms in mainly irrigated work, but non-irrigated work as well. And he's currently finishing his PhD with the University of Sydney here. Today he's going to talk to us, as he's got up there, a real-time mapping application to monitor air temperatures. Thanks, Matt.
Hi, Brett. Just a sound check. I'm assuming you can hear me okay?
Everything looks great.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so as Brett touched upon, I'm going to give you a presentation about a real-time mapping application that we've been working on in Tasmania of recent years. So firstly, what? So yes, air temperature recorded within a few meters of the Earth's surface is important for a variety of weather and climate studies, and obviously critical to input to many modelling applications. So therefore, why do we need real time? Well, for instance, important for particularly now with crop system modelling and that sort of thing. So temperature-based crop yield indices, for example, in real time, disease and insect models, and obviously from a horticultural perspective, frost and high temperature monitoring. So therefore it contributes to digital agriculture. So in Tasmania, the current situation, so often, well, at the moment we have a network of Bureau of Meteorology weather stations situated around the state, roughly around 50 in number. These tend to be, so temperatures tend to be generated from, obviously from a sparse and irregularly located network. And obviously these fail to take into account the variability of temperature, which can vary quite markedly, particularly over short distances and variable terrain. So if you're a vineyard, for example, if you're relying on a station that's located, say, 20 kilometres away, in a lot of regards, it can be quite meaningless. So as an example, we've got a few telemetered air temperature nodes in the Tamar Valley wine region. As you can see, maximum error can be, in the vicinity of 10 degrees at times. And in this example, around 5 degrees. So, and these are only located, about 12 kilometres away. So it can be quite variable over a short distance. So I thought, well, why can't we do this spatially? So a bit of a literature review of it revealed that, there has been a lot of research conducted to spatially quantify it, but its application in real time, which was quite surprising, was actually quite limited. There's been some studies done in the UAE that can deliver sort of sub-hourly interval air temperature maps, but the resolution is quite coarse. And there's also some daily, like for example, T-min and T-max, or daily air temperature maps produced as well, which is obviously, a lot of low temporal and spatial resolution. So I thought, well, we could probably do a little bit better in Tassie, and let's see what we can come up with. So obviously, from a previous project that we delivered in terms of working out climate variables for a range of crop suitability mapping, so frost risk, we were able to link around 267 non-telemetered air temperature loggers to the network of Bureau sites that are telemetered using hourly data captured over a 2-year period. We investigated machine learning, so regression trees, as well as the traditional approach of thin plate spline interpolation mapping using DEM and covariate data. And we did this at a spatial resolution of 80 metres, and we apply this in real time using cloud research resources. So this is sort of the locations, or I guess the state of play at the time. So, you know, we had a reasonably good network of telemetered stations complemented with non-telemetered data. So we can basically harmonise these into one big mixing pot, I guess you could sort of say. So, so what we did was we compared concurrent data. We can get a relationship with that, develop calibration equations, and we can use these to, we can be applied to bias correct estimates into the future. And because we've got 2 years worth of data, we can use 1 year of data to sort of evaluate or to develop the methodology and then validate it the year after. And we automate the whole system in R. So in terms of assessing the mapping and the quality of the mapping, we got reasonably good results. On the whole, it was able to, on average, you know, predict within a degree Celsius of the true temperature, which is, you know, reasonably good. We assess this against different landform classification because obviously it can vary quite a lot. The more accurate areas tend to be sort of homogeneous landform types, so your plains and sort of your low-lying valleys. Areas of variable terrain like mountain tops and open slopes tend to be a lot more variable. And we tended to find that regression trees were slightly better in predicting winter temperatures because it was able to account for cold air drainage a lot better compared to thin plate splines, which tend to be more accurate during the warmer months because of it was able to model the temperature lapse rates a bit better. In terms of appraising for real-time application, we found that 91% of the maps tend to be completed within 17 minutes of the recording hour. So for example, if a map was produced at 12 p.m, if recordings were produced at 12 p.m, maps were produced 17 minutes later. So it was quite a quick turnaround for such a large spatial extent. So in terms of current applications, we have a prototype web map viewer available for viewing. These are sort of currently produced live on a server for I guess for an example of how to showcase these products, but we also deploy these products on our state government web mapping portal. So in terms of the application, you can see air temperatures for the previous 6 hours. On our list map web mapping portal, we have a range of indices. Obviously, you've got air temperature, but one of the things we also developed to sort of complement this mapping product is degree day heat accumulation tracker through the growing season, which a lot of the vineyards find really useful in terms of tracking how warm the growing season is relative. And also what we have also is we can do that for the 5-year average. So therefore, what we can yield is a growing degree day anomaly. So what is this? So basically, you can say, well, this current season, how warm or cold is it compared to the last 5 years? And you can show that spatially, and also you can query it anywhere in the map or within an 80-metre grid spacing. Another case study that this might be a bit more applicable to this sort of audience is we've done a high-resolution case study in the Tamar Valley wine region. So what we did, we deployed around 50 telemetered air temperature sensors nodes, low-cost 4G LTE nodes that transmit data every half hour to an hour. And we can produce, obviously, near real-time, high-resolution maps that can be queried spatially, as well as produce temperature forecast that's linked to the Australian Digital Forecast Database with additional calibration thrown in on the fly from this project. Degree day and also chill hour tracker. So essentially what you can do is log into the Tamar Valley Temperature Live website. So it's a pilot project and a website that's currently live that you can link in right now if you wanted to. Zoom into a spatial extent, you can get a whole bunch of information, as well as link to sensor dashboards for each of the site nodes or sites that are actually transmitting data. So for example, if you log into the site, a vineyard grower, this is an example of a vineyard site on the banks of the Tamar River. They may want to think, oh, okay, you can see maps, you know, a whole bunch of maps. So for example, the previous 6 hours, as well as the forecast for the following day, degree day tracker, as well as chill hours for the previous season. or the season that's just been. Previous maps, obviously, as mentioned before. One of the features, as I mentioned, is you can basically zoom into an area or click on any area within that vineyard, for example, and it'll bring up a whole bunch of information regarding to that grid spot. So again, this resolution is about 30 meters grid spacing for the whole study area. And so theoretically, you can click on any area. It'll give you a temperature profile of the last 6 hours, your forecast in terms of your maximum and your minimums, your degree day in terms of the current degree day value, your average or your 5-year average and your difference, so whether it's cooler or hotter, and your chill hours as well. And also, if they want to see actually real data instead of stuff that's sort of been modelled, they can access the dashboard, and then you can see each individual, so air temperature, chill hour tracker, forecast and degree day tracker, or in a dashboard setting. And we also recently released a frost alert notification for the vineyards too. So when temperatures reach below 2 degrees Celsius, they get an email notification saying, you know, watch out, basically. Another thing that we've been working on, so I thought, well, if we can do this for a study, why don't we do it for Australia? So this is like sort of a recent evolvement, I guess, of the mapping application that was produced. So instead of just doing the Tamar Valley, we did it for Australia. So again, if you wanted to, you can log in right now and check this out. Fully queryable, so any location on a 286 metre grid spacing can be queried to bring up a temperature profile and also rainfall accumulation. But that's still a work in progress, so a little bit more work needs to be done in that area, but it gives you an indication of what's possible. So to sum up, air temperature maps can be produced in near real time at a very high spatial resolution, from local to continental-wide spatial extents. Example, the Tamar wine region, Tasmania is a statewide extent, as well as the nation. The Webb map application allows spatial querying of outputs via, I guess, on-the-fly data drilling for any geographical location. The best thing about this application, it's all written, so it can be pretty much transferable, or it's easy transferable anywhere in the world. Just need a reasonably good DEM, which is be in abundance now, this sort of information, as well as reliable data streams. So a good network of data streams, whether it be air temperature or other climate variables, and a cloud computing platform, so Amazon Web Service, for example, and all the software is open source. And as I said, we're not just limited to air temperature, other variables have been explored as well, as example rainfall. And I think, as time goes on, we can sort of experiment with other variables as well. So yes, that's me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Matt. I think that's fantastic work, and I think that the focus on the vineyards is great work, but that's showing us the nation there, and the fact that you could build growing degree days, I guess, from what you've just shown us there, for the nation as well, couldn't you? Yes,
that's for sure. We haven't done that yet. So this mapping application we've just built has only been live for a couple of months. The paper is currently being reviewed. So eventually we want to build upon it and do that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, well, with our national audience here and interested in this sort of stuff, that being able to have a growing degree day map for very, very highly spatially located is fantastic, I think. And I'm just going to ask you one quick question. There was you just sort of answered, I think, there, but somebody's asking whether you're interested in monitoring wind speed as well.
That's not the first. I've had other people ask me the same question. Look, we haven't explored it yet. It's probably it's something I'm keen to explore one day, but yeah, certainly possibly, considering that most bureau stations tend to record that that variable.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So I guess we're not limited in a lot of regards. We're only limited in terms of what the bureau stations monitor. So most stations tend to monitor air temperature, rainfall, evaporation, I think, yeah, as well as wind. So, yeah.
Radiation, that's right, yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much, Matt. If you're prepared to hang on here a second, I might just pop back. Jess has been answering all his questions online, so he's done a fantastic job of getting through his questions here. got a question here for Paul about the eGrazor. And can the eGrazor measure emissions?
No, it can't. Although colleagues have been working previously on intraruminal devices, so devices that you can put into the rumen with sensors. But the degree of success in ruminants was not great. It's a very hostile environment, highly acidic, which creates problems in terms of the longevity of the sensors. But no, we've done work where we've had the devices on the animals, and we've had in-field greenhouse gas measurement systems. So there's devices called green feed emissions units, where an animal gets a small supplement, and they put their head in, and as they breathe, it collects gas. And it's been calibrated against chambers that collect emissions. And with enough data over a long enough time period, there's a pretty good correlation. But no, the eGrazor is much more specific to location, and in our case, movements associated with behaviours.
Right. Yeah, I guess just going back to what we were talking about before, like if you're being able to use the GPS and measure the movement of the animals so precisely, if you had animals in a cell grazing management process, and you're being able to monitor them where they were, the animal itself, and how much it was, giving the graphs you're showing us about timing. And if you had some remote sensing information about how much the biomass was changing,
yes,
that's what I sort of was asking you about. If there was relatively uniform bite sizes, you could sort of get at the whole question that way, couldn't you, somehow?
Yes, you can. I suppose for us in the extensive grazing environments, we tend not to have animals within those systems. We can, and we do experiments like that, in early phases of development, where the application probably is more in terms of spatial management within large extensive systems, so that you can get better utilisation of the feed on offer. And understand where the animals are grazing, and you get animals with different types of grazing or behavioural patterns. So in the US, for example, you can get, they've shown that certain animals tend to be more upland grazers as opposed to lowland grazers and things like that. So there's a whole range of ways in which the information may be used to better manage, the resources on offer.
Right. Okay. Alison, have I just seen you've answered a question there? Is that correct? I seem to have lost the question.
Oh yeah, I just typed one out.
Good on you. Okay, well, let's ask Matt a question. Down the bottom here, I've got a question for Matt. What sort of errors do you get when you cross-validate the map predictions? Is there a time of day when the prediction is better?
Yes, so generally speaking, we find summer afternoons and spring afternoons tend to produce high errors, particularly in regard to the national version of the map, and particularly around sort of the, northwestern, Western Australia and Western interior areas of Australia. Mainly that's due to, firstly, lack of bureau stations in the area. Right. Secondly, very high variance in temperature variability, particularly for stations that tend to be sort of located near the coastal areas, but also in has an influence from the desert climate as well. So we tend to get high variation and less accurate predictions during those times.
Okay, fair enough. Jess, can I ask you a question? Before you have to head off on your day. You were mentioning the costs of taking up and the cost of the sensors, and certainly for the developing world, it's very expensive, but even just the cost of the sensors for a variable rate, building that. And given that we're seeing that, I guess maybe that the reason why variable rate hasn't been taken up a lot is that we probably need data from a number of sensors to be able to do this. We're going to just be building on the costs. So I guess, do you see it's hitting an issue there again as well?
Well, clearly the cost is always an issue, or the cost relative to the benefit. But one of the problems that I've run into on like the nitrogen sensor side is that most of the current manufacturers of those sensors are still relatively small scale. There's no economies of scale in making those sensors. And so if we found something that was truly useful became widespread in use, where manufacturers were churning those out in the thousands and millions. If every small farmer in Africa and South Asia had a sensor-based tool with their mobile phone in their pocket, we could make those a lot cheaper than we make the nitrogen sensors now. So
Yeah.
part of it is on the manufacturing and production side, I think.
And so the things we've just heard today, on the back of your talk, so the eGrazor, the ability to use a camera in front, if we have to be able to prove their value very quickly to get them up to scale, as you're saying.
Exactly. That we need to show to farmers and to agribusiness people and users that they're cost effective and that they're easy to use. So you may have something that's wonderful, but if it's too difficult, sorry, most farmers aren't going to do it.
And so we have to bring along more producers with us as we're developing these things, I guess. And or like we saw from Matt, if it's a system or some information provided by the government, or potentially that Growing Degree Day is information that's coming to us that we can get off farm freely of use. Do you think?
Well, there is a role for public information, but in terms of, say, field level management, I think the example of nitrogen sensors is a good one. Many governments around the world, certainly in Europe and North America, have subsidized nitrogen sensors in various ways, but it hasn't been particularly effective in encouraging their use because it hasn't overcome that basic concern about both the cost effectiveness and the actual accuracy of the decisions that they're leading to.
Okay. So we've got plenty still to work on, Jess.
Yes, there's lots of work to do, no lack of that.
Lots of work to do. And we're pretty well running out of time now. So again, we've taken up a bit more than we hoped, but as I said before, it's pretty elastic time on Zoom. I'd like to thank all the presenters for their time today. We will hopefully run another one of these, maybe another 2 of these as we go, depending on how COVID goes. So I'd like to thank the presenters very much for coming along. I'd like to thank all the attendees. I'm just going to share my screen quickly for Nicole to make a statement. So Nicole.
Great.
There, Nicole?
Yep. Thank you, Brett, and thank you to all of the speakers for your time and efforts in preparing for today. And a special thank you to the 140 odd participants who registered for today's. It's a bit of an overwhelming response. So for our first attempt, I think Brett and I have done quite well, and we hope this is the first of many. Over the last few months, due to COVID, SPAA suspended all of our memberships. A bit of a good gesture, knowing people were doing it tough and being uncertain in what SPAA could offer our supporters over that time. We've currently just reinstated that, so I do encourage you all to consider joining SPAA if you haven't already done that. There's an exhaustive list of benefits for being a SPAA member, and I'm hoping you've all noticed some of these changes, including our e-newsletter being distributed monthly, our magazine that's also increased from 3 to 4 issues. Hopefully very soon we will be able to return to running some face-to-face events, in addition to more virtual events. We've also created some new communication initiatives. So if you're keen to learn more research updates, we've started the 3 minutes with, and along with Alison, the Future Farm will be a showcase on that segment that we've got. So please, I encourage you to jump online and look at a membership with SPAA so we can continue to support you on your precision ag journeys. and to also support the precision ag industry to extend their information, their products and services. So that's a wrap up. In addition, Jess made reference to the autonomy code of practice that's being produced in Australia with GPA. SPAA is a partner with the Tractor Machinery Association, and shortly we'll be distributing an email to our membership base for the opportunity to have comment for that. So keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out for information that will come out in our e-newsletter due next week. So thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Nicole. And again, thank you everybody on behalf of the University of Sydney, the Precision Ag Lab and SPAA for joining us today. And especially thanks to you, Jess, for beaming all the way in the world at 6 o'clock in the morning. That was very good of you to do that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye all.